Welcome back everyone to more X4 Foundations here at Knee Pit Gaming. In today's video we're going to be talking about the early game and specifically how I make money and build my fleets as the game progresses. With a lot of the testing and playthroughs that I do, I have a need for quite a lot of credits, so I'm going to share with you exactly how I build that base of credits that I'm going to need for the in-game items that we talk about in most of our X4 videos. We're going to talk about a little bit about mods here at the very beginning, then we're going to get into mining, and we're going to talk about trading as well. So before we get into the mod section, which is labeled as extensions on the main menu, I'll let you know that you don't have to use mods. They're not necessary in the game. I simply like to use a few different mods from time to time as I feel that they enhance my experience. And of course, at the end of the day, it's all about having the most fun that you can have in the game. So if you choose to use mods, that's great. If you choose to use no mods at all, that's also great. It's a decision that each of us have to make. So we're going to start out our discussion of the extensions by letting you know that each of these mods, with one exception, which is one we're not going to be talking about today, the No Fog, each of these are available on the Nexus mod site. Simply go to Google, type in Nexus mods, and you'll be there and find exactly what you need within just a couple of minutes. So one we're going to talk about really quickly is dump excessive wares. You can get the full details on the Nexus mod site for this, but basically it's adding a consumption script to the game so that buy orders are continuously regenerated in certain stations rather than the economy really going stagnant. Now, it is not a one-stop fix or a fix-all for the economy in the game, but it certainly helps along the way on places like trade stations and shipyards and wharfs and so on. Another I want to briefly talk about is sector satellites. One of the issues that I have in the game as I get further and further and spend more time in the game is the map screen and the frames per second drops that I get on that screen. The more territory that I uncover, the more things that are updating in real time, the slower that particular screen gets. Sector satellites helps me out in that area because I can use an advanced satellite with some different functionality than you would get by default. The advanced satellite is much more expensive than a normal satellite, but you only have to put one of those down in a particular sector in order to receive trade updates in real time from all of the stations in the sector. The way that it helps me in the frames per second on the map screen is that you only have to deal with the area uncovered by that one satellite rather than having, 5, 6, 7 or more satellites in an area. So it really cuts down on the region of space that is updating in real time, and that certainly helps me out. And then finally, the Tater Trader. This is an auto trade mod script, and there are multiple of these out there right now. I saw that there was a new one added just a few days ago as of the recording of this video. Tater Trader has been one of my favorites since it was released, simply because of the number of options that it gives you. I can do a lot of different things with a trading vessel using Tater Trader, so that's why I keep coming back to it, but it is by no means the only one, and I'm not even saying it's the best one. It simply fits what I want to do within the game. So with our mod discussion over with, let's now head into the game, early game, and get started. Each time I begin a new playthrough, the first thing I do, job number one, is to make enough credits to start my fleet. So I'll make enough credits to at least purchase one ship, if not 2 or 3 at the same time. And there are a couple of ways that I go about doing that. One way is to simply fly around to the different stations. We're currently here in Argon Prime at the Argon Wharf, but fly around to the different stations and look for job offers. And those missions, some of them will pay you 30 or 40,000 credits. Others will pay you hundreds of thousands of credits. So I generally like to spend anywhere from 20 or 30 minutes up to an hour or more just earning those initial credits so that I can get started on my fleet. The second option is to mine crystals off of the asteroids. The crystals can be a great way to earn money early game because some of those crystals are worth quite a bit of money, and only a couple of those will have you well on your way to your first ship. So once I have my first amount of money, in this case, I went and got some crystals. So you can see right now at the very beginning, we only have 30,000 credits. So that's certainly not going to get us our first ship. But if I come in under inventory, I have several crystals, and you can see it has an approximate value of 2.3 million. So that is a great way, and why I really prefer, for efficiency's sake, to mine crystals in the early game. Once I've got those crystals, I simply dock at a station, come over and talk to the trader. Then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. This is where the crystals are located. You can see the quantities that I have here on the left, and I'm simply going to move all of those quantities over to the trader. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the amount of money that we're going to get. So it ended up being just a little bit over 2.3 million that we received from this particular trader. Now, each trader at each station is going to be a little bit different, so it's certainly not a bad idea to fly around to different stations and see who's offering the most for your crystals if you decide to go that route. But in this case, 2.3 is a pretty good amount, so we're going to go ahead and confirm that, and then exit his dialog screen and work our way back over so that we can see our starter ship again. Currently, this is the only ship that I have, but now that we have a little over 2.3 million credits, we can move on to purchasing our first ships. Now that we have our initial cash, we're ready to start our fleet. I always like to start with a small mining fleet of anywhere from 3 to 5 miners before I even think about really getting into trading, simply because early game miners are a great source of income, and you really don't have to worry too much about how many trade offers and how many stations that you have explored and come across. So in order to do that, we need to talk about two things. Number one is which ships are we going to purchase? And number two is what are we going to do with them once we've got them purchased? First things first, we need to get some ships built. We'll go under the Buy Ships menu. I am at the Argon Wharf, and you can see it's already running behind a little bit on parts, but that's okay for our demonstration purposes. So we're dealing with miners. We have a couple of choices. We can go small ships, and there is a mineral miner here that has 1,300 cubic meters of solid storage. Now, the solid storage and the liquid storage differ in what you're going to be mining. So that's what you'll need to determine before you figure out which ship you want to buy. Solid storage is for things like nevidium, silicon, ore, and ice. Liquid storage are for the gases, and that's things like hydrogen. And I can tell you that of my fleet, probably 90% of it or close to it will be of the solid storage variety. And that will vary based on the demand that we see for the products. And the way I determine that is simply to come in and I look at the solid wares, and we'll turn this on and I will zoom our way out. Here in Argon Prime, there is a large demand for ore, so over 37,000 of those needed. And then as I back my way out and move around, you can see there's nevidium over here, silicon over here, quite a bit of demand for that. So as you explore and open up more areas, you'll find more demand, which of course will lead to more money overall. So I come in and look at the demand for the various different resources, and that's how I determine what type of mining fleet I will have. I want to put as many of them onto the nevidium mining early game as possible because that's where you're going to make the most money. However, you're going to have to be very careful with nevidium. It's great early game, but depending on how much exploration you do, you're going to run out of the buy orders for that very quickly. The demand will dry up. Now, if you're using mods, then it can be consistent throughout the game, but be very careful about putting an auto miner on nevidium and then just forgetting about it, because once it gets filled up and there's nowhere to sell it because there are no buy orders for nevidium anymore, then it would just sit there and do nothing, and it might be a long time before you realize that it's not doing anything. So you always have to keep a watch on your mining fleet. So we've looked at the small vessel and how much storage space it had. I prefer to go straight into the medium-sized vessels, and that's why I will generally start out with a little bit more money. I will do either more contracts or more mining of the crystals before I decide to start my fleet, just so that I can go straight into the medium ships. For miners, we have two options here at Argon Prime. We have the Drill Vanguard and we have a Sunder Vanguard. The Sunder Vanguard is the liquid storage. This is for your gases like hydrogen that you would be mining, and you've got 5,200 cubic meters of space for that. The Drill Vanguard is solid storage, and you've got 4,900 cubic meters there. And as I mentioned before, the factions will all have different blueprints with different stats, from hull and shield over to the storage and different things like that. So look around and see which wharfs have the best ships for your particular needs, and then go with it that way. Now, once we've decided that we're going to purchase a Drill Vanguard and we're going to get started mining either Nevidium, silicon, or probably ore as our third choice, then how do we outfit our ship? Well, you can start with nothing selected and simply go through all of these tabs and pick out each one individually, or you can select one of the presets from minimum all the way to high. Now, I don't recommend just jumping on the high preset because it is extremely expensive. 2.3 million for one of these is very expensive. So what I like to do is go in with a medium preset. And once I get the medium preset, then I come through and I'll make a few adjustments along the way. And in this case, things like, I can save a good bit of money just by going from the combat to the all around. The one consistent thing for me is I like to always outfit my ships with at least a Mark II module. And the reason for that is it greatly affects your crew. Now, we all want the best crew we can get, and it's not only do we want them, we need them in order to do things like auto trading and auto mining. So you need at least a minimum, I would say, of about 3 stars on your crew. And the only way to reliably give yourself the best chance for that is to use Mark II or Mark III equipment. In general, the better equipment you put on a ship, the better the crew will come out. So there's definitely some variation to that and some randomness to that. I've had times where I've built, 3 to 5 ships identical. One of them came out with terrible 1-star or below crew. Another came out with 4 or 5-star, and they were identical ships. So there's some variation to be had there, but I do recommend at least the Mark II modules as much as possible, because that's a pretty good balance between, for me, the value and the cost that comes along with it. But of course, you can make your own decisions as to what direction you want to go there. Just be aware that it will affect your crew. Now, as far as the crew itself and how I like to outfit them, I like to have at least 1 to 2 Marines on all of my vessels. There will be more depending on the total size of the crew, but 1 or 2 in a miner is just fine for me. And generally, the reason why I do that is because with a miner, the only time I'm ever really going to need the Marines is if they come across an abandoned ship that they're going to claim for our fleet. Other than that, I really don't have much use for them, so keeping 1 or 2 around is fine. And I like to keep a fully stocked crew as much as possible because I believe with the changes that the developers are making to the game as we progress, that this is only going to influence the efficiency and overall profitability and speed more and more as we continue on. So I like to have full crew as much as possible, a couple of 1 or 2 Marines, and the rest as service crew. All right, so that takes care of which ships we're going to pick out. But now what happens after we get them built? Well, I've got a couple that are here in the wharf. They're actually right down here at the bottom. There you go. Well, there's one of them. Looks like there's the other 2 are here on the left-hand side. So these are all 3 ready to fire off and go. So let's take a look at how we get these guys started. We'll choose the very first one. I'm going to right-click, choose Information, and we're going to come down to Default Behavior. Our options here are going to be determined by our skill level up here. You see we're at 3 stars right now, so that's pretty good. That's about what I was hoping for when I outfit this particular ship. So we're going to click on hold position, and we're going to choose a new default behavior. When we get to trading, we'll have some options down here with auto trade and tater trade specifically. But for our miners, we have 3 options depending on the skill level. Now, sector auto mine is for the lowest skill, and that simply means they're going to look to mine and then sell within the same sector without having to do any jumps. Advanced auto mine widens that range out, and we'll take a look at that right now. And then, of course, expert mine is for the highest of the skilled pilots and crew, and that's going to give them the ability to really traverse a lot of sectors to find both materials to mine as well as sale orders as well. So let's look under advanced auto mine, since that is the best choice we have. Once we choose that, we need to select which ware we want to start with. The order that I want to go with is Nevidium first, and you're always going to have to keep a very close eye on Nevidium for the number and amount of buy orders that exist. Okay, but Nevidium is by far your most important and profitable early game. You're just going to have to watch them closely. Silicon is next as far as profitability. Then we get to ore, and then finally ice. So I'm going to select, in this case, I'm going to select Nevidium. Then we get to the maximum gate distances. So one of these will relate to how far will they go to gather the resources, and then the other is how far will they travel in order to sell these resources. So there, once we've got that done, we'll simply click on confirm. The ship will undock, and then once they get out into space, they will go about the process of mining. So now let's take a look at some of what we were just talking about with the demands. I'm going to go ahead and scroll way out. And here we can get an idea for some of the demand. Ice, 50,000 is a huge demand. Silicon, 37,000, or 19,000. We'll actually see numbers higher than that a lot of times. And then Nevidium is the most important of these early game to keep an eye on. And right now we have plenty of demand, over 13,000 in demand just over here in the void. So now that we've got a few miners on track, next it's time to move over to what happens next. Once I have at least a few miners out working for me and making money, then I turn my attention back to the starter ship. And generally I like to, at whatever station I happen to be at the time, I like to hire one of the workers that you see running around the station as the pilot for the ship. And I will spend most of my time inside of a station such as this during the gameplay, particularly the early gameplay, because I like to be here as the ships are being built and give them orders, and then to watch them undock and leave. It just adds to the immersion for me. So once I turn my attention to the starter ship, what I'm going to do with it is have it go around and map out the different sectors. This is where the sector satellites really comes into play. If we pull up the upgrade/repair option, and then we're going to come down to consumables, the advanced satellite up here is the one we're looking at. If you compare the price, 112,000 versus a regular satellite at 5,000, it certainly seems that you would just want to use the basic satellites. But as I mentioned in the intro part of the video, I prefer the advanced satellites because I only need one of them per sector. And I like the fact that it's more expensive because the cost offset is really good and makes it something that you have to make a decision on. Do you want one advanced satellite or do you want multiple of the cheaper satellites? But I like to come in and to the starter ship and put anywhere from 4 or 5, depending on how much money you got. These are expensive, so it's going to take quite a bit of money. But over time, I give them a few advanced satellites, and I simply send them out into the different sectors and have them drop one of the satellites. And I prefer to have them drop the satellites near one of the stations because it gives it a little bit of protection. Every once in a while, I will get some of the Xenon that will want to destroy my satellites from time to time. So I try to drop them fairly close to a station to give them the best chance of survival. So here in the early game, what I did was, as soon as I got myself from the starting area over here at the equipment dock to the Argonne Wharf, then I set my starter ship with its AI pilot to simply drive around the entirety of the highway system. That opens up some of the initial sectors in the game, and then of course gives us the opportunity to open up other sectors that will appear on the map as time goes on. So my goal throughout the game, as quickly as I can make it happen, is to build my fleet and drop as many satellites as I can so that I can increase the number of trade offers that I have. So let's say that you haven't had your starter ship do very much exploration yet, if any. You might be looking at the number of trade orders and you might see something like this. You only have 5 stations or 9 stations. Then as we zoom out, we have a total of 74 stations. Now this is early game and I have not yet put out any of those advanced satellites just yet. So we don't have very many stations. 74 might seem like a lot, but as you continue on in the game, you'll have hundreds of stations before it's all said and done. The more trade offers you have available, the better chance that you have of making steady income from your traders. So now, let's take a look at another playthrough that I have where I'm a little bit farther along in this process. So now let's say that a few hours have passed in game and you have a small fleet of miners out and making money for you. You've also been sending your starter ship out to place satellites in a lot of different sectors. And now we're ready to get into trading. The important thing about trading is you want to make sure you have the maximum number of stations that you can possibly get available. The more stations you have available, that means the more buy and sell orders you have available to you. And then ultimately that will have a big effect on the profitability of your traders. So if I scroll all the way out, let's take a look at how many stations we have right now. 225, a far cry from what we had at the very beginning. So a nice amount and number of satellites have been put out, and additional sectors have been discovered. So once we have a good amount of stations out there, we want to get started with some trading. First and foremost, we need to buy a ship. The trading vessels, once again, you have the choice of a small size ship, and you've got the Courier Vanguard, which can hold just shy of 2,000 cubic meters. I prefer to stick as much as possible with the medium size, unless I have a specific case where I need to move some of the smaller inventory items. And that's when I get into the smaller vessels. But for the most part, I stick with the medium vessels. And here you've got 2 choices. You've got a couple of Vanguards. I prefer the Mercury Vanguard simply because of its container storage. But as always, the different factions are going to have different values here, so you can search around and see which ones you want to build. But here we have 8,200 cubic meters of storage space. And when we're looking to outfit our trader, it's very much the same as when I'm outfitting a miner that we discussed earlier. I'm looking for a minimum of Mark II and sometimes Mark IIIs, just depending on my needs. And then when we get down to the crew, of course, you'll want a captain. But then on service crew, well, I'll generally, same thing here as I do with the miners. I will have 1 or 2 of the Marines. The remainder of the crew will be the service crew. All right, so now that we have gone about ordering our ship, let's take a look at a ship that has just been built, that is right down below us. And we're going to select it. Let's see, that would be this one. I'm going to right click on it, information, and much the same thing that we did with the miners, but instead of going to the mining section, we're going to go down to the bottom and do the trading section. And this is actually a great example to use because you notice under the skill, they're not quite 3 stars. They're about 2.5 stars roughly. And that's not enough to do auto trading. So the random part of the draw with the crew has really bitten me here. That's one of the reasons why I love Tater Trader. One of the first things I did when I got the mod is I went in and adjusted the number of stars that was required, and you can see there is no requirement for stars. Now, by default, I believe it's 2 stars, but I can't remember exactly, so don't quote me on that. But I have removed that star requirement because it's not something I have complete control of, and I don't like it if I can't control it and I'm going to be stuck not being able to auto trade. Now, if you do not have any mods and you're in this situation, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to manually find the buy and sell orders out at the different station and queue those up for your trader. The order queue will show the buy and sell orders as you queue them up, and you can queue up somewhere around like 15 to 20, I think. It's a lot. And so you can queue all those up. They'll go about their business and they'll earn experience as they go along. And eventually, if you keep checking on them, they'll make it to the 3 stars and you'll be able to do the auto trade. But for our purposes, today we're going to look at the Tater Trader just a little bit. So once we select that, then we've got a lot of options. And that's one of the things I really like about this particular mod. And I'm not going to discuss in great detail all of the options that you have here. Go to Nexus Mods and find the Tater Trader mod, and it will give you a cheat sheet that will go into great detail, and as well as a description that will explain a lot of what's going on here. There are just a few things I want to touch on. First things first, the Trader Home. This is either a sector or a station. If you're going to choose a station, it's generally best to choose one of your own stations because I believe it can cause some issues if you do not. This is only really valuable if you choose homebound. Homebound means that every time they complete a trade, buy and sell, they will come back to their home sector before they seek out another trade. So this can actually slow down progress some, but it can be useful under certain circumstances. Then we have the maximum gate distance to buy and sell. So generally, I'm going to take each one of these to its maximum amount because the wider the range, the better chance that they have profitable trades within their area. If you are only interested in selling in your Trader Home, then you would do the opposite here. You would go with a maximum distance that they can buy, but they're always going to come back home to sell. So again, plenty of options there. The check distance is a good one because it actually adds in the number of jumps that the trader is going to have to make in order to determine which of the profitable trades it will take. So this can help you get some closer trades rather than spending a lot of time with them flying around. Another one that I use quite a bit is Station Trader. If I have stations that I have built and am really interested in having traders work those stations, then I use the Station Trader within the Tater Trade mod. Next up, we have the wares list, and we have, thankfully, some presets. This saves you a lot of time. I usually, at the very beginning, will stick with just legal wares, and this is basically giving them the ability and freedom to trade anything that's not going to get us in trouble with any of the factions, which would be the illegal wares, which are right down below. So I generally leave this as is for now, and then as we get on into the game, I will have some specialty ships that will focus on one or more of those lists. Next, you can add in some sectors that you want them to always check on for buy or sell orders, and then others that you want them to make sure they do not go into for trade offers. Then you can enable trade bans with any of the factions. And then finally, we get down to the scan speed. I don't generally mess around a lot with this one. Scan speed, the higher you get it, the quicker that the mod will scan for available trade offers. But this can cause some slowdowns depending on the strength of your computer. So if you're finding that you're getting a lot of hesitation or the game is slowing down, then maybe try reducing this scan speed some. It'll take a little bit longer to find the trades, but it might make for a smoother gaming experience. So that's going to do it for trading. As I mentioned before, I generally will start out with a small trading fleet, anywhere from 3 to 5 at least, in my mining fleet before I start getting into traders. And then I will add a few traders here or there, just depending on how busy they stay. If I have traders that are not finding a whole lot of good trades and they spend a lot of time just sitting around doing nothing, then I won't add any more traders, and I will try to focus then on discovering more sectors and putting out more satellites. So now, with that in mind, let's move on. A couple of things that I want to touch on as we finish up today's video. The first thing is, once you've got a basic fleet, you've got a few miners out there and you've got a few traders out there making money for you, where do you go from there? Well, one option is to simply rinse and repeat. Continue adding more miners and more traders based on the demand you're seeing at the different stations. If you're seeing a drop in demand for, say, silicon, and you've got several miners mining silicon, then maybe you want to move some of those miners onto a different material such as ore or ice and so on. So you always have to keep track of your fleet, but I just continue to expand my fleet to whatever level I'm interested in. And that will vary from playthrough to playthrough. Sometimes I go after as big a fleet as I can get. Other times I focus on stations, which is the other item I wanted to touch on very briefly in today's video. Once you are several hours into the game, you'll probably have a few million credits at least saved up. So at that point, you can start thinking about whether or not you want to build a station. And in building a station, there's a lot more to it. I've done dedicated videos in the past dealing specifically with stations, but you'll need to determine what it is that you want to build and where do you want to build it, which sector do you want to be in, and the option for managing your different plots for stations is right here in the bottom choice here on the main map screen. Okay, and as far as how would you go about determining which products that you wanted to offer? And the answer to that, as the answer usually is to check supply and demand. I highly recommend looking just very briefly out into the universe and just seeing the parts and the prices that are offered for these. And you see some things like, for example, hull parts. Hull parts are needed by all of the shipbuilding stations and are generally in fairly short supply. Same thing with engine parts. They're always in short supply and they're needed everywhere. So these are just a couple of examples of things that can be very lucrative to make on your own stations and then trade with. The thing about stations is that they take a lot of money up front for the construction, and they generally take quite a bit of time to amass all the materials you need for the station. But once you get them up and running, they have the potential over a long term to make quite a bit of money for you. So that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned as we will continue X4 Foundations.